Boom.
So he was basically Tennessee's quarterback before Peyton Manning. How bad was Washington run? Gus Rott played until 2008. Wow.
Nope. I'm just finishing something out. That's the only reason.
I was trying to learn more about Gus Rott.
Fire up those RG3 captain shares. I might just go full on 100%. It'll feel better if it wins. And we are live. Welcome to the Live Before Lock show, the show that goes on before Live Before Lock. We've got Wednesday afternoon football, a sentence that is fairly uncommon in the NFL, but COVID brings us some goods from time to time. And Adam and I are in luck because we get to watch RG3 be the quarterback of a Wednesday football game. I would just assume that if this was going to happen, it was not happening in the NFL. There was some new upstart league that's going on. But luckily for us, it's Ravens and Steelers, and we get to watch RG3 take down an undefeated team. Adam, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, if you had told me coming into the year that we were going to be getting to watch RG3 on a Wednesday afternoon, I would have assumed that there was some like football version of the NBA's Big Three that launched where, it's just a bunch of, old pros just running pickup games basically. Not a, big divisional matchup between the Ravens and Steelers, but pretty excited about it. Normally I don't really care too much about individual players' performances, but certainly rooting for RG3 to do well.
Yes. Adam, I think you're probably more of a current red football team fan, my bad, than I am, but we were both quite a bit I thought he was like the savior, and coming out of his rookie year, he was kind of the savior, and it was really exciting for about 18 months.
One of the only times in my life I've gotten to be legitimately excited about the future of Washington football, and it did not last very long.
Yeah, the worst part of it all, not that he got injured and ended up, not really fulfilling his promise, but man, we traded a lot of picks for that.
Yeah.
It's just the double kick in the junk, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Our previous fandom. We are here to talk Ravens and Steelers. But before we get started, we've got a packed house already, 500 people, 50 likes. Let's hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. We got a ton to talk about. Adam and I will be here for about a half hour, and then we'll turn it over to Alex and Kyle as they take us all the way to lock. So let's just start at the top. Captain spot on DraftKings. It's pretty spread out from an ownership perspective. We've got Ben Roethlisberger at the top, just north of 20%. And then you can kind of go in a bunch of different directions. What stands out most to you at captain today on DraftKings?
Yeah, it seems like ownership is pretty efficient compared to top scoring percentage. Roethlisberger at the top certainly makes a lot of sense. You have the Steelers coming in as about 10.5-point favorites. Clearly a game that they should win against most of the Ravens backups and practice squad. From an ownership standpoint, though, I think that Benny Snell stands out a bit. We only have him projected right now for 3.5% captain ownership on DraftKings with a 12.5% chance of being the top scorer. I think it makes sense because there's certainly a lot of kind of wiggle room in how to project the running backs for Pittsburgh, whether McFarland takes on a bigger role or Snell is truly the guy. But you're talking about a team that's a 10.5-point favorite. If they just, and it's a good defensive unit going up against RG3. So there's certainly scenarios where the Steelers just handedly, win this game and are in control all the way throughout. And you see a little bit more of a rushing heavy offense than you normally see from Pittsburgh. So if you're not going to get ownership going to either of the Pittsburgh running backs, I think that it makes sense to be going to, both of them, but especially, Snell, because we assume he's going to be the lead guy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Snell grades out relative to ownership, one of my better plays at the captain spot. I think the guys at the top might be a hair over-owned. Do you have a similar feeling on FanDuel for the MVP spot where Roethlisberger clearly in the lead, and then it's kind of jumbled whether you want to go to RG3 at 14,500, Deontay Johnson at 13,500, then you could drop further down to Claypool or Juju. I like Snell there again as well at 11K.
Yeah, same. The only real difference for me is that, kind of similar to how we talked about in the Seahawks game the other day, because you don't get the increase in price at the MVP spot, Roethlisberger, in terms of his chances of success, is probably still under-owned, or at least he's projected to be under-owned. But you're still talking about just a lot of raw ownership going there, around 27%. So if you're looking for a lower-owned guy that also appears to be under-owned, then I think you're getting right back to Benny Snell for really all the same, theory reasons that we talked about with DraftKings.
So speaking of Benny Snell, our sponsor for this show, No House Advantage. If you're not familiar with them, they do player props. It's not going to be your straight fantasy points. You're picking a player prop, whether or not they'll go over and under a particular prop, and you assign that prop a certain weight. So your favorite prop might have 7 points. As you work your way down, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. I've got one for Benny Snell. How do you feel about 60.5 rushing yards for Snell today?
I would take the over. I have him at about 66, so not by a huge margin. And I think that, again, I think there's a lot of kind of uncertainty there because we really have no idea how rushes are going to be split up by for Pittsburgh. But I think that it's a pretty good line, as far as where it should be. But if I had to take one side, I think I'd take the over.
I've got one other prop for you that I want to touch on, and then we can go check out everything else. By the way, if you're not playing on No House Advantage today, you are missing out on a large advantage, because this will lock at 3:40 Eastern time. They're giving out $1,000 to first, $2,500 guaranteed prize pool. It's $10 to get in. And there's only 80 of 275 entries in the contest right now, 29% full. We're staring some overlay in the face. If you want to try to get into a contest that is likely to overlay, now is the time to do it. Go to No House Advantage. Use the promo code Awesemo when signing up. Get yourself a little bonus on that first deposit. But yeah, 80 of 275. We're looking at some overlay, and that's a good thing to have if you're trying to build your bankroll. Maybe this is a prop that'll help you build your bankroll. RG3's passing yards, 175.5.
I have the under there.
Oh, I'll take the over. I figure he's easy 350 today.
Yeah.
Are you close?
Not really.
Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. Would that be a highly ranked prop? Or at least would you assume it would be, given that disparity?
I mean, I would assume so. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty here, because my assumption is that RG3 isn't going to be very good. I think the Ravens are going to look to run the ball as much as they can. Like if you think about how the Ravens want to attack this game, I would think they want to just have this be like an ugly 13-10 type game, not turn into something where quarterbacks really come into play more than they need to. So my assumption is that they're going to be, as long as the game's competitive, they're going to be looking to keep the ball on the ground. My assumption is also that RG3 isn't very good, otherwise he would have been starting somewhere by now. So those are obviously things that I could be very wrong about, but that's where I'm leaning towards. And I think, that combined with the Steelers being a very good defensive team, it sets up pretty poorly for RG3's passing yards. The most logical way I think he gets there is kind of similar to like how Dwayne Haskins threw for 300 yards against the Ravens. And it's that the Ravens jumped out to a big lead against Washington, and Haskins just, carved them up in garbage time. You could certainly see something like that for RG3.
So we touched on MVPs and captain spots from things we like. Is there anybody that you see right off the bat that is getting significantly over-owned? We'll start at the captain spot for now.
Looking at FanDuel, the captain spot would be DraftKings.
Yeah, start wherever you want.
Okay, yeah. So FanDuel, I don't really see anybody being like drastically over-owned. Yeah. Not, or at least it really matters. Like, maybe some lower-owned guys like Eric Ebron or Chris Boswell, stuff like that. But, nobody that's really garnering much ownership, getting much more than they deserve. On DraftKings, it looks like kind of the same thing. We mentioned it before that ownership looked pretty efficient on most of the top guys, and then you start getting to like running backs, and they're probably a little bit under owned. I don't really see much that looks over owned to me, at least out of the guys that are getting more than a couple percentage points of ownership.
Yeah, it all seems pretty efficient and flat from everything that I'm looking at right now. If I look at just our projections in general, should be no surprise, Ben Roethlisberger with the highest projection on the slate. And then you start getting into all of the Pittsburgh wide receivers, whether that's Johnson, Claypool, Juju. It's interesting to see those three guys all projected relatively similarly as the second, third, and fourth highest scorer on DraftKings, because I think that we're not going to see those guys. At least I'd be surprised to see those three guys all be bunched up in the end. Every one of the touchdowns that goes to Deontay Johnson just means it's not going to Chase Claypool. It's not going to Juju. There's a lot of variance in those three wide receivers. Do any of those three wide receivers stand out more to you than the others?
I mean, I think Johnson's the number one guy. We've seen his massive target share in games that he's been healthy for this year. Second, I would go to Claypool just because of the amount of touchdown equity he seems to have. We know he's a really explosive receiver, but he's also big. So you're getting red zone targets. You've also seen him be used out of the backfield, especially in the red zone. Certainly not crazy to think that he gets some red zone carries when you're talking about a Pittsburgh team that's missing their top running back. So Claypool would be next for me, followed by Juju, who again, I don't have any issue with, but when I'm ranking him against those three guys, he just happens to come in third.
That's fair. Anything else you want to touch on from the captain spot or MVP spot, either site, FanDuel or DraftKings?
So not really having to do with that, but just a bit of news. We did get confirmation that neither of Mark Ingram or J.K. Dobbins will be active for this game. that was assumed since neither one had flown to Pittsburgh as of the last report, but it's been confirmed now. So you are looking at Gus Edwards and Justice Hill as the guys in the Ravens backfield.
Interesting. I always thought the flight thing was overblown. It's not a problematic drive from Baltimore
or flight.
to
I mean, you could just be on a different flight. It's like an hour.
Also true. Either way, that was not going to be an issue.
Neither one is active for the game.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. If they were active, did you have any interest? They all graded out really poorly for me either way, so it didn't really matter all that much.
I didn't have interest in them, but it would have pulled back on Gus Edwards and Justice Hill.
Okay. Before we move on to the utility / flex spot, got to touch on a couple things. One, free content for today. If you want to check out Alex's Showdown rankings, they are free. You should see a link popping up in chat at some point in time soon. So if you're playing Showdown, you want to get an idea of what's behind the paywall, our NFL Showdown rankings are free. If you're playing PGA, if you're looking to get into the Mayakoba for tomorrow, our PGA Top Golfers tool, also free today. And we've got some shows coming up for the rest of the day. As I mentioned before, Alex and Kyle will be on immediately after us coming up in, 15 minutes. They'll be taking you all the way up until lock. And then we've got two biggies coming up later tonight. MMA strategy show at 7:30. Jason Floyd, Pete the Heat Rogers, breaking down this Saturday's UFC card. And a little bit of an announcement. I'll be doing Live Before Lock with Pete again this Saturday, so tune into that. And then PGA Live Before Lock, likely the final PGA Live Before Lock of 2020. This is the final PGA event of this calendar year. Jason Roslin, Ben Raza, 8:30, breaking it all down in PGA Live Before Lock. So that's a ton of content going on today. Check it all out. Let's slide on over to the flex / utility spots. I'm just going to hit you with the three guys that I like the most at utility. Then I want to get your thoughts. Benny Snell, RG3, Gus Edwards. They are my three highest ranked guys at the utility spot. Anything there that you like? Anything that you don't like?
No, I think it's reasonable. I mean, Edwards looks like he's getting the ownership that he should, but at only 6,200, assuming he's going to be the lead back for Baltimore, it's one of those things where normally you're not really that interested in a running back from a team that's a 10.5 point dog, but it goes back to the assumption that I'm making too, that the Ravens look to run the ball at least for as long as the game is, remotely competitive until they're forced to stop. So I think having 6,200, at that price point is very reasonable. If you were, up around Benny Snell, I'd be much less interested, but at 6,200, I think that's fine. Snell, I think, is probably going a little bit under-owned at flex, just like he was at captain. And then who was the third guy you said?
A great question. I don't remember. Snell, RG3, and Gus Edwards were the three.
Okay, yeah, RG3. Yeah, again, we don't know exactly what to expect from him. My assumption is that he's not very good, but the one thing is that not only do quarterbacks just inherently have at least a higher floor than other positions, but we do expect that RG3 is still capable of running, and that always gives you a higher floor than quarterbacks who just work out of the pocket and don't give you any rushing equity. So, it's a tough matchup. I don't expect him to play particularly well, but he's also not priced like a top tier quarterback, and he does give you rushing equity. So no problems there, especially with the ownership where it's at.
Anybody stand out as significantly over-owned to you in the utility spot on DraftKings? We could transition to FanDuel afterwards.
Yeah. So again, the ownership, I think, mostly looks pretty good. I mean, Eric Ebron maybe getting a little bit more ownership than he should, but even that, I think you can justify. Like, he's been pretty heavily targeted, especially by 2020 tight end standards. The problem is, of course, that you're running into competing with Deontay Johnson and Claypool and Juju for targets. But I don't think he's like drastically over-owned. Outside of that, the defenses, the Ravens in particular, probably getting a little bit too much ownership, maybe a little too much ownership going to Justin Tucker. But out of the main guys, surprisingly, I don't really think that anybody looks over-owned.
Okay, that works for me. Who are your favorite utility options? Just like guys that you expect to have your most exposure to.
So RG3, for the reasons we talked about, and also he just right now, looking at Alex's sim results, RG3 seems to be under-owned. As far as the value goes, I do have some interest in the Ravens non-Marquis Brown receivers. Willie Snead's out for this game, and even though that doesn't seem like a really big deal. He actually has been more involved in the offense over the last few weeks. Mark Andrews also out. So there's plenty of targets to go around, and now you're assuming you're going to get more snaps. Dez Bryant last week made his debut for the Ravens. He was pretty heavily involved by Ravens second receiver standards. And then Devin Duvernay dropped back to I think 13 snaps last week. But now you have the additional snaps opening up without Willie Snead. He's been kind of their short yardage, like get him the ball, try and get him in space receiver this year, only averaging 7.2 average yards per target, or average depth of target is only like 7 yards. So he's someone that I think maybe the Ravens could look to kind of try and like spark the offense, just get the ball out of RG3's hands, get him some completions and some confidence. I think maybe you see some valuable PPR points from Duvernay. So I think that Dez and Duvernay both at cheap price points are guys that I'm interested in.
All right. Just over 1,000 people in the room right now, 138 likes. Perfect opportunity for you guys to hit that thumbs up once again. If you've already hit it, please don't hit it again. It will negate that original thumbs up. So only do it if you haven't done it yet. We've got about 10 minutes to go before we turn this one over. So we're going to transition a little bit now to the FanDuel Flex spot. We had this conversation on Monday with regards to Russell Wilson, and I'm kind of feeling the same way here. I think Ben Roethlisberger in the flex spot is a bit overowned at 16K. I would just rather have more of him at the MVP spot. Do you have that same sort of feeling today?
I don't think he's quite as overowned, but yeah, I mean, I still would prefer him at the MVP spot. The problem you always run into with FanDuel structure is if the court, because there not being a difference in pricing, you're kind of like threading a thin line or walking a thin line, like trying to get a quarterback like Roethlisberger to be one of the best plays, but not the best play, not the top scorer. I do think that because of the potential for some of these Steelers receivers to just post monster games, Deontay Johnson has massive upside. So does Chase Claypool. Like you can still see pretty easily how it would happen that you want Roethlisberger in your lineup, but not a captain. So I think maybe in this game, a little bit wider margin for that than in some other games. But still it can be kind of tough to go that route. So I think a lot, again, kind of would just depend on who my captain is and the rest of my roster construction. I don't think that, like, if you have Johnson or Claypool at captain, I don't think you need a rule forcing Roethlisberger in, but it's fine if he's in there. But like, if you're going the route we talked about before and going Benny Snell at captain, I think that you should be more inclined to just not have Roethlisberger, because when you're thinking about how Benny Snell at captain wins you a tournament, the most likely way that happens doesn't involve Ben Roethlisberger also having a good game.
Right. Glad you laid that out. That makes for a really good point. Some of my favorite options at Flex today: RG3, Benny Snell, Chris Boswell, Anthony McFarland at 7,500. Those are the guys that stand out most to me above where we have their current ownership projected. Do you have any guys that stand out to you at the flex spot that you're going to be getting a bit more than the public?
I'll mention Dez Bryant again, just because he's only 7,500, which I think is a little bit too cheap of a price point. We only have like 12% ownership going there. The Ravens, assuming they get down in this game, they'll have to throw the ball to somebody. We know that Hollywood Brown is far from consistent. Dez got plenty of snaps last week. He was involved in the offense. So I think the price point there, like if his ownership were to come up, I'd pretty quickly not be interested, because I don't think he's likely to have a good game. It's still Dez Bryant in his second game in the NFL in like 3 years with RG3 at quarterback. It's probably not going to go well. But 7,500 for the number 2 receiver on the Ravens in a game where they're 10-point dogs, I don't really have any problem getting there. With you on Boswell, it's just a spot where he's pretty inexpensive and his ownership isn't really that high. So I think those two stand out to me.
Okay. I like it. I don't have much else to add in terms of guys that I either like or dislike. I think Deontay Johnson is slightly overowned in the flex. I think everybody else is all relatively neutral. I guess we should probably touch on some cash options. So on DraftKings, is there anybody that you see that you would be shocked isn't in the large majority of cash lineups? Who are the cash locks for today?
So I don't really see a way to get away from Roethlisberger at captain in cash. Like, I just don't really see a reason to do so. In tournaments, certainly, but in cash games, it's not difficult to build a good lineup with him, and he gives you the highest floor out of anybody. So I don't really see a way around that. Boswell at 4K is really useful. He's in most of the top builds that I have. Deontay Johnson fits in really easily at 10,800. So those guys pretty much seem like they're going to be in there for me. Gus Edwards, I think, is pretty easy to get to as well. And then it's kind of just sorting through whether you want to go with one of the backup running backs, whether you're going to get RG3 in there, which I always like to get the quarterback in if I can, especially when it's somebody that, I think will run, even if I don't think he's very good. So, I think that it's probably kind of an annoying cash slate, because I think that the correct build is really, really easy to land on. And then it's just kind of like flipping coins between mediocre guys that project about the same and then hoping you end up on the right side. Normally you prefer it if it's a slate where there's like a variety of builds you could use and you're trying to find the right one. But, I think that several guys kind of just very easily get into the lineup, starting with Ben at captain.
Yeah, well, we're on the same page there. Ben at captain looks good. I'm pretty confident RG3 is going to end up in my cash lineup as well. I really like getting both quarterbacks, and at least from a DraftKings perspective, RG3 is just super cheap. Like if my options are RG3 or the Steelers defense for $600 less, it's RG3, and to me, it's not particularly close.
Yeah, to me, normally, really, in most cases, regardless of the quality of the opposing quarterback, the only way that I end up not getting to them in cash is if it really downgrades my captain or my ability to get the other guys from the team that I like. Like, for example, the other day when the Packers played the Bears, I ended up not playing Trubisky in cash because I wanted the extra piece from the Packers offense. I wanted to get all of Aaron Jones, Rodgers, and Adams to maximize my exposure to the Packers. But on this slate, you don't really have that issue because I still can get, I'm not going to be able to get all of Roethlisberger and all of his receivers and everything anyway. And you can still get Roethlisberger at captain and still get at least one of his receivers too, depending on what else you do, and still get RG3 in there. So it's not a spot where I'm really looking to get away from the opposing quarterback just to roster Marquis Brown or something. I don't need to do that.
Super chat coming in from Toby V29. So thank you very much for the super chat. I assume I know the answer to this question from you, but I'll ask you anyway. Do you try to cross correlate your FanDuel and DraftKings Showdown lineups so they can both hit? And if so, how?
No, I mean, I think it's important to just play the best lineup that you can on whatever site you're playing on. The one thing that I would add to that is if you wanted to do it, if you have a tiebreaker, let's say you build your DraftKings lineup and it's straightforward, you have exactly what you want, and then you build your FanDuel lineup and you have what you think is literally a coin flip between two lineups. I think that you could go either way, whichever you're looking for. If you're trying to limit your downside, you could play the one that doesn't have the same players as your DraftKings one, or if you're trying to just sweep everything, play that one. But outside of literal coin flips where I can use it as a tiebreaker, I'm not going to make what I consider a suboptimal lineup on DraftKings or FanDuel just because of what I did on the other site.
Yeah, if you're in between on Deontay Johnson and Claypool and you have one on one site and one on the other, I understand why people would want to do that. But ultimately speaking, we're talking about variance to your outcome for this, if you're willing to take more or not. I wouldn't make the change because I'm willing to eat the additional risk. If my lineups look almost identical across both sites, so be it. I just assume that's happening because that is my best option. Right. If that's something, if you're trying to mitigate the downside a little bit, then yeah, feel free to try and hedge a little bit against it. But
yeah, it came up in the Seattle game the other day because I knew I had Lockett and didn't have Metcalf on DraftKings, and then on FanDuel I had a 2v2 that projected about this everything was exactly the same for me. One of them had Metcalf, one of them had Lockett. I slightly preferred the Lockett one, but I played it, but I did consider choosing the Metcalf one just because all things were equal for me, and it kept me from having my entire investment in the slate on Tyler Lockett versus Metcalf. But outside of considerations like that, I don't think it should play any part at all.
One last thing to touch on before Adam and I get out of here. We're doing a bit of a giveaway. Get excited for this one, guys. Go check out the pinned tweet at Awesemo_com. And I'm just going to put this out there right now. If you don't get this question right, just turn in your internet, pack it up, Move to some place where you never have to see football again. Who will have more passing yards in today's game? Ben Roethlisberger or Lamar Jackson? Best of luck in getting that question correct. Again, you've got to get
Jackson
the question
wins
right.
That one, my day went really poorly.
Yeah, so did Pittsburgh's.
You don't need Roethlisberger at captain if Jackson wins that one.
No, you don't. I don't even know who the backup is, but he'll be the captain then. That's a bad whatever that movie was with the captain joke that I don't remember. Use that.
Yeah, I know.
Why am I asking you? Like, you know.
I haven't seen the movie, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm the captain now. Anyway, Lamar Jackson or Roethlisberger responds to the tweet.
Captain Phillips.
Oh, there you go. Well, I should have known. I almost thought it was the one with that Sully dude landing the plane in the Hudson, but that's two different things. There's no pirates in that one.
Different things.
Lamar Jackson or Ben Roethlisberger, who has more passing yards? Respond to the tweet. Follow Awesemo_com. Follow at Awesemo NFL. Like the tweet. It says the reply has to be in by Thursday by 8:20, but we push our things in the same way that the NFL pushes games. So if you win, you have the opportunity to win a $1 NFL Express weekly pass if you're a new user. And the giveaway, the main piece of the giveaway, you win a $1,000 annual platinum pass. That's the best thing we've got going. It's the big monster giveaway. And you basically can't get the question wrong. So you'll be eligible to be selected once you get it right. Just don't get it wrong. It's not Lamar Jackson, I promise you. If Lamar Jackson has more passing yards than Ben Roethlisberger, kudos to the 2 or 3 people that got that question in with the Lamar Jackson answer, because that's going to be a really fun way to win a $1,000 annual pass. Adam, one more minute before we're turning this over. Do you have any final thoughts on this slate?
No, I think that I'm mostly just excited to watch RG3 hopefully exceed expectations.
There we go, guys. 1,300 people, 250 likes. Hit that thumbs up as Adam and I get out of here. Let's run that number higher for the boss man and Kyle. They are going to take you all the way up until 3:40 Eastern time. And then we get to watch some afternoon football on a Wednesday. Doesn't really get much more fun than that. I'm excited to watch some sports at a time that you don't normally see it. Good luck today, guys. Adam and I will be back for Live Before Lock on Monday. I guess we don't have a Thursday game, so we'll see you in a bit. Good luck. We're out.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm not used to winning money this early in the day on Wednesday. Yeah. Oh, there he is. Yo, what's up, guys? A little Wednesday afternoon action here. There's a lot of good duos in the history of the world. There's Simon and Garfunkel, Peaches and Cream, and Wednesday afternoon in NFL football. Here we are. A little Showdown live before lock action. I'm Alex Baker, joined today by Kyle Dvorchak, of course, presented by Awesemo.com. Sponsor the show, No House Advantage. Kyle, how you doing, man?
Not bad. It is it's got to be the weirdest time for a football game in my lifetime, or at least like that I can remember. Like even the middle of the day, they couldn't get a primetime slot right because it was some like the Rockefeller tree lighting or something.
Yeah, something
is that
like
it?
that. I'm not planning to watch that or anything like I do every year. But that you think that a little Baltimore Ravens or Steelers, especially with the Steelers being undefeated, that would pretty much take precedence over anything. But I guess Christmas comes first. Like, what the heck, right?
Yeah, so much for the war on Christmas. I feel like we're getting too much Christmas at this point. More football.
That's what I'm thinking. So, if you haven't already flipped the channel here, we had an interesting slate the other night where someone took down $1 million solo on DraftKings in the Showdown slate off of a last minute Hail Mary. And we got to talk about this lineup because it had DK Metcalf at captain, no Russell Wilson, had Carson Wentz instead. And Russell Wilson ended up having a pretty low scoring day. I think he was outscored by Wentz by like 0.4 or something. That was a one-off from a big train. So what did you make of that? Because obviously when you have a stud wide receiver at captain, you got to think the quarterback would be high on the list to pick.
Yeah, I don't think it was like suboptimal in the sense, like sure, like median projection, it doesn't look ideal to play a player who, for DK Metcalf to pay off his salary, it requires a lot of yardage, probably a touchdown. I don't think that ended up happening, but it requires just a lot of fantasy points, and that probably means a lot of points from Russell Wilson. But it doesn't guarantee it. Like he can have a game where his market share numbers are high enough, and Wilson, like throws a pick, doesn't rush a lot. The things that happen, he just doesn't have a crazy game. And because it gets you from a lineup that you said, you said it was a one-off from like a train of lineups, because it moves you from a lineup that if it hits, you're splitting so many ways. So your ceiling outcome is not like first place like we think of it, to a ceiling outcome where sure, you have a far less chance of hitting, honestly, because it's like negatively or just uncorrelated. But the expected value, I would have to imagine at least like there's a break even point. I'm not sure if it was like, it's hard to say if it was more plus EV or not than like the train of lineups, but it's definitely something we have to consider, especially when you look at like Russell Wilson's cost as well, is something that he isn't guaranteed to be in the optimal lineup just because he has a good, not great game. He can score similarly to Carson Wentz, but paying down to Carson Wentz lets you get the other good plays of the slate into the lineup. So I'm not sure if our watchers right now, if they're entering a 1,000-man $1 single entry, not sure if that's the type of approach you want to take. If you're entering a field where one of the primary goals is to simply build lineups that if they hit their ceiling outcome, actually win you first place as opposed to winning you a 1/100 split of first through 100, I think it's fine. Like I wouldn't make it a massive priority. I'd probably prioritize trying to, get different elsewhere, leave salary, build different correlations in my lineup, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it showed in the number of people that had that lineup where there was a big trade-off between the number of entries and that correlation. So that was very interesting. Not my favorite way to get a unique lineup, but I mean, any unique lineup in that big a tournament is going to be somewhat suboptimal in a lot of different ways. So big congrats to the sole winner on Monday. But we got a really interesting slate today. Some big prizes once again. Now we got to talk about who's out here because, I mean, it's like everyone on the Ravens pretty much. So Lamar Jackson is out. Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins are out. Willie Snead out. Patrick Ricard, the fullback, clearly a crucial part of the Ravens offense. He's out. And then we have Mark Andrews out. Nick Boyle continues to be out. So what do you make of all this injury situation on the Ravens?
I mean, I think it's one thing to just say, obviously, there's going to be like some values and stuff. I think it's more interesting on like how do you approach building Ravens lineups? Because I think there's like potentially some value in just saying like RG3 maybe like he's a backup quarterback. He hasn't been like good for a long time. Like we even have a sample of him playing like with the Browns and stuff where he wasn't that good. But like he's a starting quarterback who's super cheap and we don't have him like egregiously owned at the flex. Like I don't think this offense is going to look good, but can he rush a little bit and throw enough completions and maybe score a garbage time touchdown? Like, I think it's possible. So I think maybe there's like a little leverage into running like head on into these Ravens guys, specifically because also this game doesn't have a great total. Like it might not take a lot of points for like if Gus Edwards goes out, doesn't catch a single pass, which shouldn't be a surprise, goes for like 60 and a touchdown, 12 points, even at his price, might not seem like a lot. But if the game total goes like under at its already low number, it probably means that that's a good enough score to get in. So I wouldn't be like completely ruling out playing like a decent amount of Ravens across your like portfolio of lineups.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have a lot of plays in this game, whether they have success or not. That's going to be the big question. But yeah, I think everyone realizes the Ravens are huge underdogs here. They're going up against a very tough defense. It's going to be rough, but that doesn't mean people can't have big performances. So we'll get into the players target on the Ravens shortly. For the Steelers, James Conner is out on the COVID list. Jalen Samuels is out at running back as well. That means Benny Snell is their number one. Anthony McFarland also maybe getting a shot that he hasn't had an opportunity yet to do in his rookie season. He's a good value. And then no other major inactives that I see from the Steelers. So what do you make of James Conner being out? Do you think that's going to be a key on this slate?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to see a lot of Benny Snell. And most interestingly, like Anthony McFarland was a healthy scratch to start off the year. And the one game we have with like a modest like James Conner game, because it was the one where he got injured on like the first or second drive, was week 1. And they almost exclusively used Benny Snell. I think Jalen Samuel got a target and a carry in that game. It was all Benny Snell. Of course, that was positive game script against the Giants, if I have that game correct. So, but this game kind of projects similarly to be like a positive game script game where they can just rely on the run. So I think we should see a lot of Snell, and I'm kind of surprised that he's not coming in as more popular. Like, just insert, I don't know, I'm not going to call him a bell cow back, but insert heavily used running back as a massive favorite. I'm a little surprised at his ownership right now. And if that, if I have any reason to believe that, which I do, our ownership projections are pretty good, I'm probably playing a lot of Benny Snell, honestly.
Yeah, I think Benny Snell is looking like a pretty sick play today. I mean, the one thing I'll throw out there is that Pittsburgh doesn't use the running back position a ton, especially compared to other NFL teams. James Conner, well, first of all, they run the ball at a low rate, and then they have so many like threats at wide receiver that James Conner doesn't usually get the number of targets that you'd kind of be hoping for from the so-called workhorse back. So that is why I think even though Benny Snell is a great value, like compared to the receiving and passing options on the Steelers, maybe not the sexiest play. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. All right, let's talk about the Ravens, because this is what you guys all needed to know. Adam and Josh, of course, broke all this down for you, but we'll do our deep dive here. But first, make sure, if you're not already a member of Awesemo.com, you can get all of our Showdown projections, ownership, and the top Showdown players tool with the Express membership, $3.95 a week. Make sure to check that out. So Baltimore, we got to start at the quarterback position, because RG3, he hasn't played much over the past few years, but this is his chance. And I mean, he's going to be the guy with the ball a lot. He's not expensive. What are you expecting out of RG3 today?
You said some of the things I like about him. He's going to have the ball in his hands a lot, and he's not very expensive. I mean, he's a backup quarterback for a reason. Outside of his like incredible like rookie season, our sample on him is that he takes a lot of sacks, throws interceptions at a high rate. He's probably not that good. Most quarterbacks aren't, but he does seem to still probably have some rushing ability, and that could be crucial for him just paying off his price. I don't think it bodes particularly well for this passing attack, but they're all kind of priced in a range where you can accept the fact that it might just be one long play, or you might catch the only touchdown that RG3 throws, and that's all you need. So I think when you adjust for salary, like I'm not too excited to play any of these guys, but RG3, I think just because, like you said, like quarterbacks score more because most plays start with the ball in their hands. He has at least some, we can project some rushing ability. I don't love him, but the field really doesn't seem to like him. So for that reason, I'll probably end up coming in over the field on him at flex. I think it's possible to play him at captain, especially if he does end up like surprising us with how much he rushes. I mean, if they kind of don't really get much of a chance to change their offense and we see a lot of running like we see with Lamar, maybe he's actually a decent play at captain as well. I'm probably more so playing him flex though.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's a tricky one because if anyone from Baltimore has a big day, I mean, him and Gus Edwards would be the highest on the list. But just picking a captain from Baltimore to begin with is a little bit of a tricky proposition because they are only projected for 16 points. I mean, to put that in context, that is less points than the Jets usually are projected for. So we're dealing with a real bad football team here. Lamar he's already not that effective in passing this year, around 7.5 yards per attempt. Now you put in a guy with limited practice time who's not as good, but there is a chance that Baltimore wins this game. And on my top Showdown plays tool, you can go and find out the percentage that each player will be the captain. I'm projecting RG3 for about 3%. Yeah, that doesn't sound that exciting. So let's go to a running back because Dobbins and Ingram are out. Now, the talk of the town has been, are you going to jump on the Gus bus? Because Gus Edwards is supposed to be the lead back. Justice Hill hasn't played a ton this year. So what are you expecting out of the Baltimore backfield here?
Yeah, Justice Hill definitely hasn't played a lot this year. I'm just checking to make sure this was right, and it is right. He doesn't have a carry on the season, and he was kind of a late, like a best ball flyer type guy going into last year. Had like not terrible draft capital backing him, and just like never panned out for him. But the thing is, like we've seen all season, the Ravens even having like expensive draft capital, day 2 draft capital, J.K. Dobbins, and up until their most recent game, were very reluctant to ever give him the bulk of the carries. And we know that running back is a position that street free agents can come in and actually be like successful NFL players, like the Seahawks, great example of this, like Alex Collins doing this and all their backup running backs being fine. So although Justice Hill, I mean, no experience carrying the ball this season, I believe he has a catch. That's his only touch on the air. I don't think it's impossible to see him come out and get maybe a little more work than would surprise people. You do have to add the caveat that how much is work on a team with a 16 implied team total worth? It's probably not a ton, given that his touchdown equity doesn't seem great because the Ravens don't seem to be scoring a lot of touchdowns in this game. He could also catch passes as kind of the player he profiled to be coming out of college, but the Ravens notoriously don't pass the running backs a lot. I think he's a fine value. I still think we should project Edwards to see, a bulk of the carries, 70% maybe, just because who else are they going to give it to? I think they brought up a practice squad player for this game, but don't expect to see a ton of him. I think Justice Hill is probably the better points per dollar value simply because the between the tackles role isn't going to be super great on this. I'd probably just take the cheaper guy.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, so the Ravens have been very good at running the ball this year. Gus Edwards has averaged 4.4 yards per attempt. As you mentioned, Justice Hill hasn't even gotten a carry, but since it is a plug and play position, I think that he probably will play, especially given the Ravens just always seem to do a committee approach. I think Justice Hill, let me pull up my spreadsheet here, but he has seen some work receiving the ball, if I recall correctly. Gus Edwards is a significantly below average. Okay, so I guess Justice Hill, he's only run routes on about 50 plays. So, or sorry, that was this looking around 11 plays. So even sparingly used there, but Gus Edwards, he has only been targeted on 11% of routes, and I feel like he's kind of known for not being a receiving running back. So I'm kind of thinking maybe Justice Hill mixes in more on those downs, and RG3 might check down more than Lamar. So I'm seeing a little bit of potential there. Do you have confidence in Justice Hill at all?
Confidence feels like a strong word, but I agree. If there were a way that these guys were going to get used, it would be probably splitting the carries in favor of Gus Edwards. And it's very difficult to see Gus Edwards getting, like, I know they don't throw to their running backs a lot, but not getting a lot of work at Justice Hill's price is probably fine. And 2, maybe one of the reasons they don't throw to their running backs a lot is Gus Edwards is out a decent amount. And he literally went, I think, like the first 8 games of the season without catching a pass. Like, he notoriously does not draw targets or catch passes. Like, maybe you insert someone who can actually catch passes like Justice Hill, and maybe he gets a few targets, 2, 3 at his price plus a handful of carries. Wouldn't be bad. I think he's a good value. I'm not like incredibly excited to play him because, like we said, he does not have a carry, has a handful of routes on the season. Those things don't sound like the types of players I want to target. But the context of this game is a lot different. And like we said, running back, mostly a plug and play position. And the Ravens kind of have this history of using different backs like in a committee approach. So I think Hill's a pretty good value. I don't even think Edwards is like a bad play by any means. I just think we may be over assuming the role that Gus Edwards gets and under projecting the potential for Justice Hill.
Interesting. I was kind of, I think Gus Edwards is a little bit more reliable, certainly, but yeah, Justice Hill, that's a big question mark. So that will be a really interesting thing to see how they use the running back position here. He was a 4th round pick. I think you mentioned they use draft capital on him. So they have a reason to go send him out and see what he can do. So someone to be looking at a value price there. One of my strategies is picking 5 Steelers and running back with 1 player on the Ravens. So Justice Hill stands out as maybe, if you're capping out the rest of your spots, he'd be a good option there. Now at wide receiver, Willie Snead is out. That means that there's some more snaps to go around. In addition, with Nick Boyle and Mark Andrews out, they had been running routes together on a good amount of plays. So I'm expecting more routes from wide receivers. There are really 4 guys that are going to be out there today with any regularity: Marquis Brown, Boykin, Duvernay, and Dez Bryant, one of our faves from a few years ago. So how are you ranking these Baltimore receivers, and how much confidence, if any, do you have in the passing game here?
Not a lot of confidence. I think it's pretty fair to say, given their implied team total, given that they're on their backup quarterback, who's probably not even that good of a backup quarterback, especially given the rate he takes sacks, throws interceptions. Not a lot of confidence. They're all priced in reasonable ranges. Like Marquise Brown isn't priced like he used to be, deservedly so. He's been like one of the least productive like named players in the NFL, given like the air yards he sees and the targets he sees. Dez Bryant has kind of stepped into a pretty significant role. Like obviously it's a very small sample, but like most recently he was actually outproducing Marquise Brown, who I believe last week, no catches on 3 targets. I think that was last week. I'm not willing to say Dez Bryant is the team's number 1 receiver in this game, but like at his price, I think he's probably an equivalent play to a guy like Marquise Brown, maybe still a slight lean to Marquise Brown. I think Devin Duvernay, a little interesting. Dez Bryant clearly separated himself in quite short order as the number 2 receiver over Duvernay, running a decent amount more routes than Duvernay did. But last week was not this week. They're going to have a lot less players on their field. So like Duvernay is probably close to an every down player. And at his price, he's around that 3K range. I actually think on a points per dollar basis, he might be my favorite of all of these guys, simply because like I kind of ascribe to what you said. Like I'm probably trying to play a lot of Steelers. Frankly, I don't care if I don't even spend a lot on my 1 or 2 Ravens spots. Like they're not projected to score a lot of points. I'm okay with spending on cheap Ravens, expensive and more Steelers. Duvernay kind of fits that build and should be on the field every down or close to it. So it's probably my favorite of them because of his price and being in a similar-ish role.
Nice. Yeah, I like Duvernay as well. Miles Boykin's the one I feel less confident in. Between the bunch, Dez should be out there a good amount. Marquise Brown, if you look at the game, like as you're saying, he's been doing really terrible, and it's like a name brand, so I'm interested to see how that shakes out. But perhaps a bounce back candidate that won't be popular because of the game log. But that might be a stretch because you got to pick 6 players from the players today, and one of them has to be a Raven. Marquise Brown is probably going to be high on that list. All right, guys. So no house advantage. If you like betting props, they offer DFS style tournaments, and it's a lot easier to make money because you're playing against Joe Schmo instead of against some sharps that work at the sports books. So on a Showdown slate, you pick 5 props. You rank them in order of how confident you are, and if you win, you're winning a decent prize pool there. So make sure to check out No House Advantage, promo code Awesemo for $20 free. And props are a lot of fun to bet. I saw some really interesting ones on No House Advantage today. So what was standing out to you over there?
So like, as always, the over-under interceptions for both of these guys, but really for RG3, like with the Ravens, which is a very small sample, but also it's like one of the, like, I guess it's what we're working with, even in his career, but specifically with the Ravens, throwing an interception on 6.5% of his throws. Like that's obviously skewed higher than it should be because of a small sample. But it probably does allude to the fact that, hey, he's a backup quarterback who really hasn't been good in years. So over interceptions at half. One that isn't interceptions, because that's kind of the go-to, is Dez Bryant receptions at 1.5. Like, he could arguably be his team's number 1 receiver. At worst, he is his team's number 2 receiver. That's just like an incredibly low line. 1.5, even for this team who will probably pass at a very low rate and just play like slow and try and win a game, I don't know, like 13-7. 1.5 is still crazy low for Dez Bryant.
Nice. Yeah, Dez, he even knows Robert Griffin a little bit better because he's a little bit older too. So if I'm just concocting narratives out of nothing here, but they would have
been division mates. They probably dapped up after a handful of games.
Definitely. So I saw some interesting ones in addition to the quarterback ones here. Let's see. On Awesemo.com, of course, I have my no house advantage projections. So I'm kind of trying to figure out which ones are the farthest off from my projections. Oftentimes it's the interceptions, but the one I found today was the Robert Griffin passing touchdowns. Also, like, really juicy. They had the line at 1.5, and this is a team total of 16. That means they're projected to score 1.5 touchdowns total. So I'm really feeling the under on that one. As far as sportsbook props, what was jumping out at you on that?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the like bigger edges I've pushed in betting player props is just that, like, the no-name players, like the 3rd and 4th string players, always end up having, maybe it's just because they're low numbers, there's like a lot of variance that goes into it, always end up having, like, not always, a decent time, have good value on them. James Washington is one that just, like, he's still like running a non-zero amount of routes, and his line is set at 10.5. This is a team that, as we talked about, even in positive game script, just ends up being one of the more pass-heavy teams. Like, they just pass over expectation at a fairly high clip. Like, the game against Jacksonville is a really good example where, like, despite going into like halftime with like a 10 or more point lead, they came out and just kept passing. So if you're going to be on the field a decent amount, he has a high ADOT, so it really only takes 1 catch, even if he only gets 2 or 3 targets. His prop just seemed like fairly low, and I know our projections have it as a pretty clean over.
Nice. One I'm looking at is Luke Wilson. He's filling in at tight end for the Ravens, as well as Eric Tomlinson. So those are some deep DFS options. They added Luke Wilson this morning, so make sure if you didn't notice that to take him into consideration. The prop is at 8.5 on Odd Shopper, and I haven't projected for 20. So I think there's some value there. I don't love a lot of the props, but I'm kind of feeling the Pittsburgh unders for passing because I feel the game script could take the ball out of Ben's hands a little bit. So those are some I'm looking at. Pittsburgh. So the big news is that James Conner is out. As we were talking about, Benny Snell expected to be the workhorse back today. He was a really popular pickup in season long. But really this team's all about the pass. They pass at one of the highest rates in the league. On our advanced stats page on Awesemo, you can kind of see these figures put in context, but they pass 62% of the time in neutral game script. That's the 6th highest in the league. So I've noticed even when they're up, they're continuing to pass at a high volume. They just really like their receivers, I guess, because they got some good ones with Claypool, Deontay Johnson, Juju, pretty much stacked at wide receiver. So who's standing out to you from Pittsburgh today?
So as of yesterday, our ownership was kind of a little low, maybe just because of the price. People just want to, if they're choosing between the receivers, they were like seemingly going to like Deontay Johnson, who makes a lot of sense. But for the price discount, I guess they were going to a little bit more Juju than I would have expected. Like, for me, it is a very clear tier break of 2 top receivers, and Deontay Johnson, who has an incredible target share as long as he's healthy, and Chase Claypool, who is the air yards monster on this team. Juju comes in like as a pretty clean 3rd option to me. I'm surprised that like people were fairly willing to go to all 3 of them in the mix. Our ownership on Claypool has come up a little bit. I still think like Claypool and Johnson specifically are 2 guys who, for the price, like $800 more to go from Juju to Claypool seems like quite an obvious play to me. I'm pretty much always going to go up there. I don't think Juju's a bad play by any means. It's simply that at his price and at their ownership, which is 2%, about 3% different between Juju and Claypool, I'm just always going to be making the choice to go to Claypool. And Deontay Johnson, another like 400 up. I think he's in the same range as Claypool. He's going to be fairly more popular, about 3.5% more popular at captain. It seems like between these guys, I'm going to split the difference and just have the guy who is in the middle of popularity and probably has as much, if not more, touchdown equity than all of them and more air yards than all of them in Chase Claypool. Johnson with the close second.
I gotta get my boy Juju's back a little bit because it sounded like you're besmirching his value here. So what I noticed with Claypool, I've kind of been souring on him a little bit because his playing time just hasn't been as good these past 2 weeks. He played on 63% of routes in week 10, 71% in week 11. So this is their week 12 game. I got confused for a second. It just got pushed back so many times. All right. So Juju has been running routes 98%, 90%. On this season, Juju's been targeted at 18% when he's running routes, Claypool at 23%. So I think I'm kind of landing on these guys being pretty similar values and Juju being the least hot hand of the bunch. I feel like maybe he's a good buy low candidate. Deontay Johnson, certainly a fantastic player. He's going to be a main part of my lineups today. It's just I feel like he's the hot hand where everyone has seen his incredible run and they're going to be buying him as well. And then we got to talk the values because probably one of the best plays on the slate is Benny Snell. And then one of the best values is Anthony McFarland. So how are you handling the running backs here?
Yeah, it's sort of like the other side where I think like Benny Snell and Gus Edwards, both like good plays based on the volume they'll see. And then the backup is perfectly fine because of the price too, except on the other side of the ball, you're just not capturing nearly as much touchdown, nearly as much being a 10-point favorite, capturing none of being a 10-point favorite. In fact, when you play the Ravens, as opposed to on the other side, I know they pass a lot, but they are like massive favorites in this game. It is not impossible to imagine, but difficult not to imagine this being one of the more run-heavy scripts from Pittsburgh. And because of that, Benny Snell is probably going to be the lead back on a team with obviously the team with the better implied like touchdown equity. They're going to be the favorites. It's just like everything we like in a running back that we talk about on other slates. This guy just happens to be like a no-name backup for the most part, and that's fine. Running back is mostly interchangeable. If you're going to tell me he can go out and get 15 to 20 carries, I'm going to take that and not care about his name, play him a lot at captain. I think like his price maybe is what's keeping people a little disinterested. Usually when you're looking at like these backup running backs, you're like, oh, he didn't get priced up. He's a good value. And like, yeah, he's not this smashing points per dollar value. I don't really care if it's like all of the things we like in a captain. So I'm going to be playing a lot of him. Anthony McFarland, I think, is a good value. I don't think he's like a smashing value by any means because we simply don't know what his role is going to be. If you project him to like take on the entirety of like what we assume a backup role has looked like, he's a decent value, especially if he can catch passes. It's not something that Benny Snell has really done in a high clip throughout his career. So I think he's fine. I wouldn't be going crazy on him, but mostly maybe that just comes as like an inverse function of my love for Benny Snell.
Nice, man. Yeah, I think Snell certainly looks like a good play. As you mentioned, he's not like a name brand, but I think he had some good games last year, and then week 1 this year, he had 100 yards, but hasn't been utilized a ton. Besides that was the game where Connor got injured at the start. So that pretty much tells us all we need to know. If Connor's out, Snell is going to get the work. And McFarland's interesting as well. He's the rookie. So do you think there's any chance that maybe people are reading it wrong and McFarland gets more work than people expect, being a 4th-round draft pick, or is that just off the table?
It's not off the table. It's certainly not off the table. I mean, like you said, 4th-round draft pick. He was like incredibly electric, I believe, Maryland. I swear he went for like over 200 yards against Ohio State on like 10 carries or something insane. Like he looked like an interesting prospect coming out of college. They spent decent draft capital on him. My only concern is that, like you said, like we saw in week 1, Benny Snell was just clearly almost a 1-for-1 replacement to James Conner. Anthony McFarland has been like a healthy scratch at points this year, and it's possible that the only reason we're even seeing him is because Samuel's out, Connor is out. But with that being said, we've talked about it. Running back is largely replaceable. I do think the more thing that we're looking at is what the coaches believe. They believe Benny Snell is a adequate replacement for James Conner. So we have to take them for doing that. That's fine. And we'll play a lot of Benny Snell. I think you play a little bit, at least like I'm playing probably over the field on McFarland because he's cheap and he could come in and maybe see like pass catching work specifically. I think given the way Connor has been used as a pass catcher, which isn't bad usage as a pass catcher, and the lack of that role for Benny Snell, maybe that's how we get a good value game from McFarland. And then there's always the upside that like just weird things happen. And he does come in and like split that role 50-50. So it seems like at his price, being a pass catcher could be a role that is enough for him to pay off value. And there's a small upside. I think it's pretty small, probably like 1 to 5% that he comes out and like 50-50 splits the carries. But I think that's worth chasing because he's not going to be super popular and he still could fall back into a pass catching role or just like any backup, even just on a few carries could break a long run. Like Boston Scott has destroyed all of my Miles Sanders shares. So
definitely. Yeah. I think the big thing to highlight here with these running back situations is that the backups in this case, McFarland and Justice Hill, although they've played sparingly throughout the year, they are considered like pretty talented prospects. So it'll be guys you can feel more confident in as backup wide running backs than maybe if they hadn't been those draft picks. So I think at their prices of being very close to the minimum, they're going to be the last man in on a good amount of my lineups. I think they're solid for that kind of construction. So what about on Pittsburgh? I mean, the only other guy we haven't hit on is Eric Ebron, really. And Vance McDonald and Ray McLeod may be really deep flyers. So let's talk about the defense because they've been extremely good this year. They have a cupcake matchup versus the Ravens. And I think they're going to be really popular because people they kind of regard Steelers as one of the best defenses. So they kind of check that box, even though we know defense special teams isn't necessarily the best producing position in fantasy. Funny enough, I was looking at the wrong one. Okay, so what are you doing with the Steelers defense?
I'm probably going to end up being under the field on the defense specifically because the way their opponent plays, especially I would think this game, is going to be like, let's try and win this game 13-6. They're already one of the more run-heavy teams, and now they're on backups across the board. And like you pointed out, Gus Edwards has been like a pretty effective running back whenever he's been given the role. I think he averaged over like 5 yards per carry last year. Obviously, yards per carry, not a super incredibly valuable statistic, but it's at least worth noting. So for me, I see this team playing a very like slow pace, conservative offense. And we saw like Saints versus Kendall Hinton. If you didn't get a pick six in the first, quarter, they just gave up. I think that's like at the price of Pittsburgh and at the ownership, you do run into a lot of risk that not that the Ravens give up, but they play their whole game script around having a good defense and trying to win this game, low scoring, running the ball, which they already do well and often. Like the upside for a for a defense is facing a bad but pass-heavy passing attack. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of dropbacks that convert to pass attempts for RG3. So I get why you go to them. RG3 is like an easy target. Like I've talked about, he's taking sacks at like a 9% clip while in Baltimore on a limited sample, throws interceptions at a crazy rate. But those are rate statistics, and they're probably going to be running a lot. So because of that, I think Pittsburgh at their price actually has a good path to failing. Super cheap defenses, they need to score very few points to actually, quote, fail. Pittsburgh can actually just go out and score like 8 or 9 points, and that could be a failure on this slate. So I think because of their popularity specifically, I'm going to be under the field on them.
Yeah, I'm so torn because they're going to be popular. They just definitely stand out between the other defense, being in a really tough matchup, and then the kickers. I think, the kicker might be popular today as well. But Steelers defense, that being said, there's a lot of game theory that you can pull off with the defense where if you're doing it as part of a 5 Ravens stack, I think that kind of builds in a little bit more upside. So I have a lot of lineups like that. But I'm kind of torn from a gut standpoint because I don't think that their chance of success today is really that much higher than a normal day. So just because those pick sixes and fumble recoveries for touchdowns really are what kind of get you there. So I'm liking, but not loving the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I think I might have them in most lineups, even though, despite that. So let's talk a little bit about game scripts, but first make sure to check out our Twitter, Awesemo_com. We have a giveaway today where you can win a year of Awesemo plus Platinum. You just have to guess whether Lamar Jackson or Ben Roethlisberger will throw for more yards. So we're throwing you guys a little bit of a slow pitch one here tonight or today. So Awesemo_com on Twitter. Make sure to follow us, retweet it, and reply. So if you get drawn, you'll get the free month of Awesemo plus Platinum. Okay, let's talk about some actual lineup construction here. So if we're building 1 to 3 lineups, targeting some single entries, some 3 max, let's pick out a game script that maybe we want to play for, and then who would kind of fit within those parameters at captain and at flex. So what would be kind of maybe a game script you target here?
Let's go with Pittsburgh covers this game. So we're looking at, what is the spread? It was 10.5, I believe, earlier. It is, let's say RG3 gets nothing going and they can't do anything. Let's build our Pittsburgh onslaught, but maybe let's go with Benny Snell at captain. I think Benny Snell is probably like the highest leverage captain we can go with because like I talked about, he fits the things we want from a captain. He should get a lot of work. We saw he was a very 1-for-1 replacement for James Conner briefly in week 1. So I think you can go like a Pittsburgh onslaught. Snell, let's go with your guy Juju. Snell at captain, Juju, Ben, and then at that point, I think the biggest question is like who is our one Raven? I'd probably throw it to like a cheap guy like a Devin Duvernay. If he just gets if they're just out there and they're passing a little bit more than expected because they're losing a lot, throwing a lot, he might only need a few catches, might not even need to score. So Duvernay would be like our one Raven, at least one Raven. We could throw a second one there. We could still run 4-2. But I like an instruction that looks something like Snell at captain, Roethlisberger, and I guess Juju because he is the cheapest one. Once you're getting to Snell, Roethlisberger, and a receiver, you are getting to kind of an expensive group of players there, limiting what you can do for the rest of the lineup. So I guess I'd like to start with those guys, and we can throw Duvernay unless you want to throw someone else in there.
Nice, man. Yeah, like Duvernay as the run back there. If you do have Snell captain, like you're saying, I think that makes a lot of sense to just punt the last spot. That gives you a great chance of hitting the optimal lineup. So I like that a lot. Steelers defense, that could be a good one. Now, we didn't talk a lot about kicker, but Chris Boswell. I am a little bit leery about the Pittsburgh kickers because I feel like they're a little bit more ambitious with the 2-point conversions. Yeah. But maybe that's not even that significant. So do you like Boswell in a stack of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I can definitely see Boswell in a stack of Pittsburgh. I don't think it's a bad play, and it saves you money, especially when you look at playing him over Justin Tucker. It's just difficult to see the Ravens putting up a lot of points, difficult to see them getting into the red zone even. So for the price, Boswell is easily my preferred kicker. And I think we probably have just described a lineup that I almost certainly have.
Nice, man. Yeah. One thing I noticed on the draft screen is that Justin Tucker has been averaging almost 10 points a game this year. So I'm kind of wondering if people will overvalue him because of that. Where Chris Boswell, obviously, if you use any sort of logic, is going to be a superior play. So maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic when I'm looking at that, but Boswell is going to be a pretty decent part of my lineups. Now let's talk about some contrarian builds. Let's talk about what are you going to do if you're going to target the Pittsburgh passing attack? Who would be your captain? Who would be in the flex? And how would that affect your Baltimore exposures?
Yeah, so I think if Baltimore ends up winning this game, I guess it's not exactly what we're talking about, but if they end up covering, keeping it close, it probably happens like through the run. So I'd imagine a Pittsburgh stacking, like passing stack, still looks like a very favored Pittsburgh game. And it probably just happens sort of like they did against like the Jaguars, like I talked about, where they took an early lead. Actually, it was more like a halftime lead. They just kept passing anyway. So I think even in a Pittsburgh passing stack, you can probably still comfortably run like 5-1 Pittsburgh lineups, even 4-2 Pittsburgh lineups. But it's probably a better way to run back with like an RG3 than with like Benny Snell at captain. I think the Benny Snell at captain probably has more negative correlation with like an RG3 plus Duvernay or whatever, RG3 plus Luke Wilson, who I'm glad you brought up earlier, because their other tight end, Eric Tomlinson, is like a legitimate right guard. Like he's like 6'6" and 60 something. He hasn't played a snap out wide since 2018. And Luke Wilson was actually like a fine, good enough pass catcher when he was in Seattle. So let's say we'll throw more love to your boy Juju, because I like Juju. I think the reason I probably talk a little bad about him is because he hurt me so much this year. Had high expectations for him. So I'd say like a Juju captain, Ben Roethlisberger. Maybe we say, especially if you're going Juju over Claypool, you're probably doing it for the reasons like you talked about, that Claypool isn't yet established as an every down player. So let's say James Washington. We'll play this in like one of the more higher entry single entries. We'll go like Juju, Ben Roethlisberger, and say like a James Washington there. And then on the other side, gotta throw some love to Luke Wilson.
Oh, nice, man. Yeah. James Washington's an interesting play. Like this is going to be in lineups where you don't have Claypool, because that's the reason he's coming off the field. It's been tilting every time I've had Claypool, so I wouldn't mind being on the positive end of that for once. But I like your ideas there. I think Juju being captain in a Pittsburgh passing lineup, that makes a lot of sense. He's the lowest owned in our ownership projections of all three captains at 8.6% compared to Deontay Johnson at 15, Claypool at 11. And the odds that he's the top player are higher than his captain ownership at 10.6% based on my simulations. So I think that's a really solid way to build that. I'm looking at the money line for the Steelers right now, because what if we want to target that Baltimore wins? And actually, this is blowing my mind right now, but based on the line, they think that Pittsburgh is 82% to win and Baltimore is 18%. I would have thought a lot lower for Baltimore, to be honest, especially given the 16.5 points projection, and then Pittsburgh's undefeated. So what would have to happen for Baltimore to win this, and how would that figure into how you're building your lineup if you're targeting Baltimore?
So I think there are probably like two ways. One, RG3 just turns out to be like way better than we expected, or like just runs hot. You don't have to be that good, like just have not lucky, but like capture the best outcome within yourself. So that could happen. Or if this game is just like miserably low scoring, like if this is like somehow like Baltimore has a good defense. I know they're missing a handful of guys for this game. They do have a good defense. So I think it's possible. I mean, possible. Like we were talking about, the spread is quite wide, but like you said, it was 18%. Let's just call it 20% because that makes math easier. That's 1 out of 5. Like 1 out of 5 isn't really that low of odds, all things considered. When you're talking about playing tournaments, if you are putting yourself in a position to win first place when that 1 out of 5 happens, I get why you would build a lineup this way. So I think like you could probably run RG3 at captain there. You could definitely run Gus Edwards at captain. Maybe you could run like Baltimore defense at captain. I think more they would just be like an interesting flex play. This is definitely a scenario where you could go multiple, like you could probably go 2 to 3 of the group of kickers and defenses. I'd probably still even skew towards 2. It's just a lot to see like 3 of those guys get in the lineup. But going, say, like Boswell plus Ravens defense, RG3 at captain, we'll say Dez Bryant, something like that. That I think would be a good start to a Ravens onslaught type of lineup. You could also put like Gus Edwards in that same category as well, either captain or flex.
Nice. Yeah, man. Edwards definitely stands out. RG3 maybe captain. I kind of like that. Given that there's no one receiver that's going to dominate the target share here. They have 4 wide receivers and a decent tight end. So I could see that paying off. And then Justice Hill, if Baltimore runs the ball a lot of times, maybe some of that trickles down to Justice Hill, even though he has no rushing attempts this season. So when I say it that way, it makes me think, well, maybe I'm being a little optimistic, but yeah, now that I think about it, if Baltimore is stealing this one, maybe Gus Edwards just sees a ton of work. And then the Ravens defense, I think, is a good option if you're trying to build this contrarian stack as well. So I like that call. So let's pick one of these three approaches in single entry. What would you kind of target as your number one lineup?
I think the Benny Snell lineup, assuming it's not like a 100-man single entry or something, I think the Benny Snell lineup is probably my favorite, because I think it probably has like maybe not quite as like high leverage as like a Ravens onslaught, but as the prediction of like the 1 in 5 chance, as we called it, of the Ravens winning, you probably look at something kind of similar for like Snell in terms of his odds of hitting, but his odds are probably much more correlated to obviously a Pittsburgh win. So I think like in terms of how rare it's going to be, it'll still be fairly rare to see a Snell and captain lineup, but it doesn't require something as absurd as the Ravens pulling off a win here. So I think the Snell one is probably my favorite of them. The Ravens pulling off an upset is much closer to like the largest of the single entry, but more closely lined, probably like at least a 20 max. I don't know. It's not like absurd to think that they couldn't win. It's just more, far less likely. So it's more like a 20 max. In single entry, I think the Snell lineup is probably, based on my lineups, it is my favorite build.
I agree completely. Yeah, Benny Snell is in my top like small field lineup, and then I'm looking at some of my Millie Maker lineups. Or sorry, it's 500K to first, 500,000 lineups. I actually have some Gus Edwards at captain and other Baltimore stacks. So it just kind of is this spectrum from most likely to least likely that should help you kind of determine how to approach the tournament that you're in. And then my cash lineup, I guess there's no game script there, but I actually have Big Ben at captain. So, yeah. He's obviously going to be the highest projected player in this game, I think. So, the fact that he spreads it around to a lot of different receivers makes him in play at captain, but a little bit more of a cash play. Do you have any love for Ben at captain in tournaments?
Yeah, in tournaments, I don't think it's like egregious like we talked about. Obviously, he's not like, it doesn't hold any rushing equity, but they do have 3 very capable receivers who on any given, like we saw one game a few weeks ago where they all saw like between 10 and 15 targets. And given their passing volume, obviously not like the perfect upside for a quarterback, it's mostly through efficiency, but he's been efficient too. And given the way they can spread it out, I don't love him at captain specifically because he is like, doesn't have any rushing equity and his receivers are like generally looking prone to having really big games. But I get why you would go there. I think it's just like the strategy I'm using to build leverage doesn't have him at captain. I think you can still certainly build plus EV lineups that feature him at captain, especially the lower down in entries you go. In the Millie Maker, I get why you do it. You can build unique lineups. I would say if you're just firing off your one shot, I'd probably rather fire off my one shot on a weird Benny Snell lineup or something like that. In your 1,000-man contest or whatever, I think he's fine. Probably still playing Benny Snell there.
Yeah, I agree. I think Snell is probably a better captain call because, he costs a lot less, and then that lets you get better players in the rest of your lineup. And then you're not kind of competing for those points with the wide receivers, maybe outscoring them. So I'm leaning more to picking a wide receiver or running back at captain on DraftKings. Select FanDuel. I know a lot of guys playing there. Obviously, quarterbacks a lot more valuable. Big Ben's probably my top captain. But who else are you targeting at MVP on FanDuel?
This might be a surprise, but I'm actually going with a lot of Benny Snell. He's I do think though the scoring is important, and it does flip it from where I was just talking about. I'm still probably favoring Snell on like DraftKings. It does flip it. I think on FanDuel, you're still more keen to quarterbacks to the point where Ben Roethlisberger does become the number one MVP play. RG3 is a little in play there. I think maybe the person who's probably boosted the most could be like Gus Edwards lineups. I think in large field tournaments, like Gus Edwards would be an interesting play there because he sort of fits the bill of like when we talk about FanDuel, like, well, these non-pass catchers, you want to jam those guys in on FanDuel. It's not necessarily true. You still want your guy to have some pass catching upside, but given that he doesn't really need to catch passes to be a good play on FanDuel, I think in large field tournaments, Gus Edwards gets a pretty solid boost, and it'd probably be pretty exceedingly unique to run with like multiple Ravens, Gus Edwards at MVP, and run it back with a single Juju Smith-Schuster or whomever.
Nice. So I like that. I like Gus Edwards at MVP on FanDuel because that 20% of the time that Baltimore wins this game, you got to think that there's going to be significant rushing volume and that he could be a big workhorse. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's take some questions, guys. If you have any, let us know in the chat here. I'll just kind of read what everyone's talking about. Mark said, who's your Millie captain? So in the largest field tournaments, who's your favorite?
Let's see. In the largest field tournaments, I think on DraftKings it actually probably does make sense to do Gus Edwards there too. It's more about the lineup that I build around it, which probably in the I'm not playing the Millie, so I shouldn't even don't listen to me. Listen to Alex. But if you are listening to me, a Ravens onslaught with Gus Edwards at captain has, as we talked about, 20% isn't bad odds. And if, like you said, if it does end up happening, it probably has either a good game for Gus Edwards, RG3 in the mix there. So I think, going with Gus Edwards, RG3, and Devin Duvernay, Marquis Brown, whomever, and running it back with just like one Pittsburgh player, even two, is going to be very rare and probably doesn't have, terrible odds of hitting. It's more about Gus Edwards being a captain isn't like the most contrarian thing. It's playing like another 3 Ravens with him, which is really what will make it contrarian, I would imagine.
Okay, yeah, I think that Gus Edwards could be a nice little way to mix up the exposures in the Millie Maker. I do like the defenses today. Sure. I mean, I think the Ravens defense is going to be super contrarian. Pretty much no one's going to have them, given that Pittsburgh has given up the least points to defenses this season, and I like the volatility there. But that does run into problems with getting a unique lineup. We have what Ravens besides Edwards are playable. So I think that Justice Hill, Duvernay, Marquis Brown, Dez, and Luke Wilson. Did I miss anyone there?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, you can play Eric Tomlinson if you want. I'm not playing. They somehow let you play, a left tackle at tight end or whatever. Like Miles Boykin, I guess in the Millie Maker is possible, but his role has really gone to like close to 0 at this point. So, I mean, he'll be on the field a little bit maybe, but really, I think you did name all the guys you definitely named all the guys in my player pool.
Have James in chat saying FanDuel's Millie is about to overlay, so make sure to take advantage of that. Luke Wilson or McFarland on DK. I mean, I feel like McFarland, although he hasn't played much this year, there's huge upside where Luke Wilson is just kind of a role player. Is that how you see it?
Yep, I think there is like a 1 to 5% chance that McFarland goes out and like 50 splits the backfield, and maybe even higher than that, even just given like our uncertainty in the situation. Like there's I'm sure, I guess you could construe a scenario where, maybe like Richard Rodgers, he catches that Hail Mary touchdown or whatever Luke Wilson does. But for the most part, I think in like, the 75th percentile outcome for McFarland looks a lot better than Luke Wilson, who I still like, but it's not quite the same as McFarland, who could come out and surprise us with a more than expected role. The more than expected role for Luke Wilson is still like 4 or 5 targets.
Yeah, so Luke Wilson, probably a much lower percentage play, although not that he's not worth taking shots on. Mm-hmm. Guys, 419 likes. Appreciate you guys hitting that likes button. I didn't even mention it. Oh, I guess Josh probably was on the show before us. So that could explain that. I can't take too much credit. Thanks to Marcus for the super chat. He says Wilson or Bryant on FanDuel Cash. Dez Bryant. It took me a second to remember who Bryant is.
Dude, it did for me too. I was like, Harrison Bryant isn't playing in this game.
I think Dez Bryant, because Willie Snead is out. The opportunity is going to be the same as far as snaps, and Dez Bryant's probably a better fantasy player when he's out there. What do you think?
Yeah, completely agree. I think Dez Bryant is at worst the number 2 receiver on his team. Like, I don't know, the way Marquis Brown has played, he could be the number 1 receiver. Just don't see that role occurring for Luke Wilson.
Yeah, Marcus, thanks for the super chat there. Guys, we got 2 minutes left until lock. Make sure to make all your final edits. I always like to go to the quick player replace, make sure there's no injury tags, because sometimes when you're building lineups and optimizers and stuff, it can happen. So begging for a leader says RG3. I hope he's 65% owned. So I guess he must be fading RG3, but I don't think he's going to be 65% owned. He'll be popular. Ben or Claypool at MVP. Now, this must be a FanDuel one with that terminology. So which way on FanDuel would you lean at captain between Ben or Claypool?
Assuming we're talking about all of the, like, not talking about the milli on FanDuel, let's I guess we'll go with Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, I like the generally going for the receivers. That's mostly on DraftKings. I think as long as you're not struggling to build like a unique lineup, like you might be if you play Ben Roethlisberger at MVP in the milli, as long as that's not the case, you're just building a much better median lineup for FanDuel by playing quarterback there, specifically Ben Roethlisberger quarterback, not quite as much RG3.
Yeah, I think Ben's superior. His chance of being the highest scoring player in my sim is 1/3 of the time, whereas Claypool is only 9% on FanDuel. If you compare that to DraftKings, the split's much closer between them, 20 and 12. Now, if you do have Ben at captain, he's the most popular projected MVP on FanDuel at 27%. That means you're going to have to mix it up more with the rest of your lineup than if you have Claypool, who's about 1/3 of the ownership. So in the context of the lineup, I think both can be solid, but be more contrarian with the rest of your lineup if you have Ben at cap MVP on FanDuel. Steelers DST getting 20 DK points tonight, is begging for a leader. Duvernay at captain, DK large GPP. Any love for that?
Probably not. I mean, sure, it could happen. It's just like, what are the odds of Baltimore hitting them? What are the odds of the passing game hitting them? What are the odds of the passing game hitting and it being Duvernay? The more you run down that rabbit hole, it seems like the thinner and thinner it gets.
Yeah, I agree. I have him at 1% chance of being the best scoring player. And that doesn't mean you can't make a good lineup with him at captain. I got a couple, but it becomes harder to build a lineup that's unique because there's only so many ways you can spend that salary. But I actually kind of think it's a viable build to just punt and max out your salary on the rest of your players. This is not going to be a very good lineup for a milli maker. All right, guys, we got lock. So any final thoughts about today's slate?
No, I think the Ravens stuff, I don't even have like a ton of like Ravens onslaught lineups. I just think that's really interesting that I think people are going to well over perceive the odds of Pittsburgh winning this game. Because like I think when there is it's a close to certainty bias. I think it's called something like that, where if we perceive something to be like high percentage, we're like, it's basically 100. 20% is not basically 100. So it's interesting to see if somehow the Ravens pull this off. Like, I'm really excited to see what the milli maker lineups look like if they pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, based on that line, they have a reasonable shot at it. So you'd think all these COVID outs would give them a lower chance, but that's not the case. We got a game that could be competitive here. So that'll be a lot of fun to see how this one plays out. You guys, if you're not already a member of Awesemo.com, well, first of all, click the subscribe button on the video. That makes sure that you'll see our future videos. And on Awesemo.com, you can get the Express Pass for $3.95 a week for NFL. That gives you access to all of our information for Showdown slates. So that is going to pay off big dividends because you can win a ton of money on these slates. Thanks No House Advantage for sponsoring the show. Promo code Awesemo Thanks to our producer, Jordan, behind the glass, and good luck to everyone watching. Hopefully we get some big takedowns.